Welcome to yet another lesson. I'll try and make this lesson as intense as is possible. We've missed out on a number of things, but let's actually get working and get solving problems because that is what we want to do. If you remember, we said we need our XAMPP and our XAMPP must be running. Uh, XAMPP consists of Apache and MySQL. That's what we're doing. In the previous lesson, we learned how to actually do that. So what we need to do is we need to open our folder, which is our date 25 content, and then that's what we'll actually be working on. At the same time, we'll be doing more changes to our content. Okay, so here's what we've got. We've got our HTML, and there are some changes that I actually put to whatever we've got, and we'll need to go through our content as we proceed. So let's actually just go to our local host and then we put v5. Okay, so I'll be taking notes as we proceed, where I think our notes will help us master some of the content that we've got. There's a number of things that we need to learn whilst we're doing our learning, okay? And that is there's so many things that we need to have. Like we said, we are working with PHP. The PHP simply is a server-side scripting whereby it's just scripts. At the same time, we also said we need to have tags, right? That's tag. For our PHP, our tag would be as follows. And we have our question marks and then our PHP like that. So at the same time, we've learned about certain things already as we speak, whereby we've got content that we'll be wanting to work with. So we'll go through the cycle with each of the languages. For now, we want to actually understand what PHP is. We want to be able to have a framework of what some of those things include. At the same time, we then need to have HTML, the basics. We'd also need to have CSS, the basics. Would also need to know how to work with images, also the basics. Okay, so this will then help us build or help us work with um, content or the context that we want to have our website feature. And these particular details you'll be having available whilst we are learning and doing some of the things that we want to do. So I'll try and have an intense video for each concept or each element that we want to work with, and we'll be building from there. So if we come to our page, this is what our page looks like. We've got our home, we've got our learning page, we've got our Be Humble. We want to actually see how we got to that. Okay. The last time we also explained the tags. So we've got HTML, we've got head, we've got title, we've got body, and then we've got H1. This we didn't actually explain. This pretty much gives us a heading. This pretty much gives us a horizontal row. And then this then becomes our PHP content or our PHP context. However, we have actually not learned what this is. Let's actually have a breakdown of it. So for example, we start with variables. Variables are as follows. Variables pretty much give us an unknown value. Okay? In PHP, to create a variable, we have $sign. So that denotes a variable. Okay? And then we also need to have a naming convention. for our variables. From variables, we also go into some of the concepts that we've learned in some of the other languages, which is your loops, your arrays, your objects, among other things. So these are some of the things that we have in our learning or through our learning. Okay, so let's actually get to explain what this code does, and then we'll get into our own code. So in essence, our page is this whole context. Line 1 marks the beginning of our tag. Line 16 marks the end of our tag. Line 2 starts at 2 and ends at 4. Line 3 starts and ends in the same line. The body tag starts at line 5 and it ends at line 15. Our H1 tag is in one line, which is line 6. Our HR tag is in one line, which is line 7. And then the rest of what we've got there is our PHP content. Okay, so I'm going to remove this and then explain how this works. And we'll see what each element does. So bear in mind, like our compiler in C, if we come here, we'll be able to see the context of what would have changed. So if I save this content here, I come back here and I refresh, I can actually change what's there. Okay, so would want to actually explain each element as we proceed. And as we proceed, we'll also be adding flesh to our page. So this marks our heading 1. This marks our HR, which is our horizontal row. And then we want to put content within whatever it is that we're doing. Okay, so let's actually do it this way. I'm actually thinking of doing uh, the, the work in a slightly different manner. Okay, let's actually put a very old tool in HTML, which is from the beginning of HTML, which is our table. Okay, I'm gonna use this because it's something that I'm at least comfortable with. Okay, so we need our table TD and our TR, which TD means our table column and TR means our table row. Okay, if I'm right, we'll be able to say variable, and we'll be able to also put our example. That's the next thing that we want to put. That I hope I put this in the right order. Let's refresh and see what this gives us. Okay, I think the order is wrong. We need to actually switch this to be our table row. This also becomes our table row, and this becomes our table column. So TD and TR. I think if I do it this way, we should be able to get a result that we would want. Okay, let's come back to this particular point. Yes, I think that's what we're hoping for. Yes, it's now a table. Okay, so this is what we want to actually be working with and be doing something that we can see. Okay, so I can copy that and then paste it. I copy that and then paste it, and then we see what. So we want a integer variable, and then we want a character variable, which is similar to what we have done before. And we recognize variables because we've used them before. So, like we said, we just want to say percentage and then the variable name, which can be whatever it is we want to call it. But as you can see, the moment that I put a dollar sign, it already recognized that as a variable. So we then need to name our variable. We can call it num, like that. That then becomes our number. And then our example for character, we can then call it word, like that. So what this then means is we've actually just created a table and we're actually showing what some of this content or in the context of our content. Okay. So we've got our integer, which we have said is integer, and we've got our variable, which we have said is $num. So outside of the PHP tags, this does not mean anything. We'd actually need to put that in the PHP tags so that it actually gives us what we are hoping for. Okay, so let's just save. We go to our page and then we see the following. We are saying our variable is integer and our example is how that integer can be put. Let's actually remove this variable because it's not looking very neat. Let's actually remove that bit and we remove that bit and then we save. So we refresh and then we get the following set. So we've got a character and we've got an integer. Okay. So what this then means now is we can actually be able to create our variables in this particular instance. Okay. So our example is how we can use this variable. We can add an extra row. Okay. Why are we adding an extra row? We are then saying this is our table and this is our row. This is also another row. This is also another row. So we can actually add an extra row to then show the use. Okay, so I'll put the table, which is TD. I'll also put a TD like that. And then this then becomes usage like that. We also put a TD and a TD so that we see what that does. And we can be able to see an example of that. So like we said, for us to be able to put an example, we need to put the PHP tag, whereby we put it this way, we put our PHP, and then we want to view what this does, okay? So we then put our dollar sign, we then put our num, then we say is equal to 5, then we get our value. From there, we then say echo, so that we display what that is, and then we put a dollar sign and then our num. We put a semicolon, and then this then means this particular instance that we've got there gives us our PHP script, and we call it a script because it's between the tags but with two question marks within it. Okay, I can just copy that and paste it on the bottom line so that I can just modify that and put the words variable, and then I echo words. I then change the variable output, and then I say save like that. That then becomes my content. So as it stands, we've actually created something that will show us the example of how some of these things work. And after doing this, we can now be able to come to our website and we refresh. So what we are simply saying is the variable that we've got is integer type. The example of the variable is $num. How we use that variable, we then get 5. Okay, and then 5 means this is our variable and we're displaying whatever is within that variable. Same goes for our character. Our character is the variable type. uh, the example is $words, and then the usage is stay safe, which then means we are simply saying in this particular aspect of code we have actually created um, our PHP variables. And the variables simply work within the context of whatever it is that we are hoping to do and to achieve. So from there, we also want to see what some of these things do. So all declarations are similar to the ones we've addressed in C, and we simply need to declare a variable as a named constant, whereby we use the $sign and the variable name. So that's one of the things that we need to work with and be able to view whilst we're working with variables.
Someone is laughing at the queen who.
So we need to with our data types, whereby we can simply create a new row, where in this row we'll do the following. We put our table row, opening table row, we do our table row closing. We then do what we want to view as the next data type that we can work with in PHP. So the next data type we want to work with is a double, and in some instances it's a float. So we can call it a double, and then we would want to name our variable double as well. And this data type will simply get a floating point value, and that floating point value, we will work with it and view what that floating point will give us as a result. So we will then also create a variable for the double. We can also call the variable, sorry, I put the wrong sign. We can then call it double. And then for our PHP, we also need to have a table cell. I think it's actually a cell. That's the best way we can actually work with it. And then in the cell, we'll put our PHP code. Where we'll put $, double, and then we say this is equal to 15.2202, and then we want to echo what this gives us. So we want our variable, which is double, and then put our closing code, semicolon, then we are done. So if I save this and then I go to my browser, I should actually be able to see my double variable in the example of the double and the content of our variable. So all we are simply saying is if we go through each and every one of the variables, here's what we will get. We'll get this being the variable name, this being the example of the variable, and this giving us the output of how we declare, initialize, and then view what our variable is. So with each of the variables, we'll be able to place them in this particular instance. So as part of this course or as part of this learning, we can actually make this as our variables. So maybe before all of this, we can actually then have a tag where it can be another tag, which is our h2, and our h2 would then give us variable definition like that. Okay. So with our variable definition, we'll then be viewing um, the types of variables that we've got and how we can actually initialize them. So from there, we can move on to different types of variables that we can work with. Because like we are saying, we want to be able to understand how these variables work and how they can be used. I think I spelled that wrong. Let's see, variable. Yes, I left an A there. Let's just correct that. Uh, Variable like that. So let's just save it. After saving it, we can come back here and we view what our variable is about. Yes, variable is now in order. Okay, so let's move on to the next variable. So the next type of variable we want to work with is slightly more complicated than the previous variables we've worked with, but I will take you step by step of how we can work with the variable and how we can use it for um, our learning. It is quite similar to some of the things that you've done in uh, the previous language which you did, which was C, but we can go through our content and then view what this actually does. So we'll go through with it step by step and then get rather a somewhat basic understanding of how it works. So we want a data type called an object, and then an object simply means we are creating um, some code that will help us to define um, data or some part of our data that we can actually refer to as an object. And then this object creates a class. A class, when we've used it or when we use it, we can actually have members and methods within that class. So in other words, we are then saying with this particular variable, we call it an object. This object, we can then put a class within that object. And then that object class will then have members and methods within it that we can then use and reference to as our object. So we can then be able to just call that object whenever we need it and however we need it. So this then means as we are working with our class, we can be able to do just that. So let's get to writing more about this object. And hopefully, as we are doing it, it makes it easier for you to understand how an object works. So we then put our $ object with the other content. But here is where it gets interesting with the PHP code. And then we want to write more about our object. Okay. So our object will then work as follows. Um, with all the other variables that we're doing, we did just have our variable plus the content that we want. So to create our object, we need to first um, do the following. we need a class, which is where our object comes in. So we can create a class, right? And then our class can have a name. So we can say our class name is student. And then with our class name student, we can be able to put curly brackets to show that our student is a class. At the same time now, we then need to have a member of our student class. So to then have a member of our student class, we can then say we want to call this member something that we can then be able to reference within our our object. Okay, so from class student, we then now need to have a member student. And the member student can be as follows, where, for lack of a better name, we can then call it um, ST new. Okay, so ST new will then stand for our new student, and ST new will then be equal to our new property and then the student, which is our class. And then with this student, we can then be able to reference our object, which is the student, within, or to be able to display whatever that object is. So we are simply saying, or if we can try and cut it down, we can simply say our class is class 2. Our variable is stnew. Our stnew then references our student being our object. So we create the object student as a class. So our variable then references an object, which is our student, and then that student is what we then want to display and see what our student does. So let's go into the last part of the code and we can be able to proceed. So we want to put print and then want to print our student. So we then put our dollar sign and then we put our student. Right? If there are no errors, we'll see in a moment. So we have done our part and everything is in order. Although I keep putting the wrong spellings whilst I am typing. Excuse me for that. Object. I need to put a C there and then we are good to go. So this then means um, we are good to go. So maybe this, let me run through this again so that it becomes something that you guys can maybe work with and understand. We are simply saying that for this data type called object, we have object as the variable. And then we've got the example, which is dollar sign object. And then we've got how it is actually used. So we create a class called student, whereby we say class and then a student, we open and close brackets. And then we have our variable, which is stnew, like all the other variables we've been having. But stnew is then going to be equal to a new student, which is our class. So by referencing to new students, we're referencing to our object. And then when we have print underscore r and stnew, we are just displaying what this does. So maybe the new concept that we've had there is a class. Uh, we also have the new keyword. We also have the print r function as well, because this is a function that we can use within our PHP. And then this then gives us the content that we want to work with and use whilst we're working with our PHP. So the next type of variable we've got is a Boolean data type. And Boolean, like all other places that we've worked with Boolean, simply gives us two options, either true or false. So in other words, we would want to see how we can work with a Boolean data type and how we can also implement a Boolean data type for the purposes of our learning. So let's say we've got our table row as follows, and then we want to have two options, which is td and our td, whereby we want to view what this demonstrates. Okay, so we want to see what our Boolean does. So the variable type we want to actually show is a Boolean. And then we need to view how a Boolean works. As it stands, we would need a variable. And as we have been working with variables, I'm sure it's now clear that all we simply need for a variable is a dollar sign and the variable name. Okay, so we might want to give it something that we can remember. Okay, so let's say um, we want something that when a user gets a an input, or if we get an input, we'll then know whether it's true or it's false. Okay, so we can call our variable choice, right? Because it's a choice between two inputs. That's what we want to have as our variable name. At the same time, we also want to be able to display what this variable does and how we do whatever it is that our variable will be doing. Okay, so let's do the following, whereby we want to see how we can work with our choice, which is our variable. So dollar sign choice, and then after dollar sign choice, we want to be able to see what choice does. In a way, I think we might need two variables because I don't think we can initialize the same variable twice. Or it will actually give us better options if we have two variables. So let's actually create another variable whereby it would be choice. Let's actually put ch is equal to false, and then the first one is choice. The choice will be equal to true. I think that makes better sense. So we want to see what each element does, and to do that, we then now need to display each of the variables. So the first variable we want to give out is choice. So we can say echo and our echo would contain the following. We want to give the output of choice, and let's put a BR simply stands for line break, and then we want a true value. We want a true value, and that true value would then be our choice. Okay, let's just pause there for a while, test it out in case I made a mistake. Perfect, so it worked. We've got a true value, and our line break is giving us something that we don't want. Let's actually change that. Let's actually change that. We don't want that line break giving us that. So let's remove that. Save it, and there we go. We've got a true value. So that's actually for our choice. Let's actually rewrite this a bit. We're still on Boolean. I don't think it will look good if we're doing it all on one line. Let's actually just copy this and create another row. And then after creating that row, we can just remove uh, the, the choice, which is the first value that we've got there. And then we put this as a false value. And then we put ch as our false value. Okay, so if we save it that way, we can be able to refresh, and then we can see what our false value does. So it's still exactly the same. We might need to change that. Sorry for that. Change that so that everything in order. Uh, so you then get to notice that with our Boolean, this is for the true, this is for the false. With our true value, it gives us a 1. With our false value, it doesn't give us a value because it's supposed to be equal to 0. So 0 with our Boolean does not actually give us a value. So when you see it giving us that, it means that we've done what we are supposed to do, but it does not give us an output, basically. But in general, our false value should give us a 0. So that is how our Boolean false works and our Boolean true works. So the next variable that we want to work with is an array. where our array is similar to our object, although we will add a bit more to our array because we need to get um, these definitions in order. And when we have the definitions in order, it becomes easier for us to be able to create a website that we can be able to work with. So with our website, we will use some of these variables and some of the concepts that will eventually add on to what we need as we progress. So the next element we want to work with is an array, like I've already suggested. And with our array, we will need to also have a bit more code than just a variable. And I'll walk you through how we work with our array. So here's how we'll start. We still need our three options. Um, although with the last option, I think I'll make sure it we can be able to view everything because it's going to be a lot of text where we put the variable being an array, and then we put our variable name. So our variable name, we can actually call it direct. And then we need to have our directions giving us what we hope to view or what we hope to see. So we'll get to the last section, but I think for the last section, let's actually put our table row below everything else. And then we start actually putting what we want to view or how we would want to view it within our PHP content. So our PHP tag comes in where we've got PHP, PHP, and then we would want to define our variable, which we said is direction, and then our directions will then be equal to an object. So it's similar to our object where array becomes our object. And then with our array, we want to put a, a direction set or a set of directions. So we'll then put E is east. Uh, we'll put a comma, and then W would be west. Would be west. We have N, that will be north, and we have S, that will be south. So let me just put the single quotes so that we have our content. So we close brackets, we put a semicolon. And then from there, we want to put another function. We have not worked with this function, but we call it variable dump. And then we want to dump our variable direction. What this simply does is it gets all our content from our direction. So in other words, we're actually just grabbing everything that is within directions and then we put it in that function and we can be able to use our directions. So if you remember our arrays from previous learning, our arrays pretty much give us more than one value under one name. So that is how we're actually working with our variable directions. At the same time, now we want to view what our directions are, or we can then say, let's get a specific direction. So from there, we then just go to the next bit, which is our output. So we put echo, and echo, we then put a $ directions, and then directions, we then need to put a property for the direction we want, and we then put a semicolon, and we can put 3 as our direction, and then we can save that. So the moment we've saved that, we can come back to our page, refresh, and then we see what that gives us. Okay, so up to here, we've got our array, we've got our directions, and then our array has 4 values, and each of the values are as follows. So we've got string, which is 8, we've got east, we've got west, we've got north, we've got south. That is the section that's giving us our variable dump. And then this is what is giving us an output. Okay. So this might actually not give us the result that we're hoping for. So I'll leave it as part of your code, but maybe let's just actually remove this part. Because if we remove the variable dump like that, and we save, we'll actually see that if we refresh, all we'll get is just the direction that we want, which is direction south. Okay. So in other words, we've got our array, which is directions, and it's got values that are we've got 4 values. So the variable dump is actually giving us all the content that is there. So if I go back and I undo, I click on save, we can then see that our variable dump gives us all the variables that are there, and we can see all of them at one go, so to speak. So maybe you can have that as part of your notes to say, with the variable dump, it's a function that will just actually give us everything. Because if I'm not mistaken, when we were doing our object, we had our print r, and our print r just gave us the object as it was. But with our variable dump, it actually gave us all the content that we find within our array. So that is how our variable dump works. So just for better clarification, I think I'll copy the array and I will array, and then this will just call this the array dump, so that we can be able to view the difference between the two. So let's just remove that there, and let's remove that from there as well, so that at least we can see our content clearer. If I refresh, I'll then be able to see the array dump and then the array itself. So this is the array where we are getting just one value, and this is the array dump where we're getting everything within the array. So we can then get to see the difference between the two concepts, or the two contexts of what we want to work with. So we want to move on to the next variable type, and it'll be as follows. So the next variable type we want to work with is the now variable type, and the now variable type will simply do just that. It will give us anything and everything that is now. If I can put it this way, it will actually just show us that there is no value that has been actually declared or used within our PHP. So it will not necessarily be a variable, but it will be an output to a variable. So we then need to put a variable name like we've been doing before, and this then gives us something that we can work with. So we can have our variable name being an input, where when we get to our PHP, we'll then actually address the input being equal to now. So this then gives us an example of how we use the now, so that we can be able to view whatever our now gives us. So we will simply create our variable, which is input, and then input we say is equal to now, which is what we want to view, and then we can do a variable dump. I'm actually liking this variable dump function, where we'll then just put our input, and then we close our bracket, we put a semicolon like that. So we can then save. After saving our work, we can go back to our page, and then we refresh, and then we can see that the variable that we're working with is a variable. The example is $input, and then the output is just now. So this pretty much gives us the variable output, and we can be able to then get the now value from our variable or from our list of variables. So that is how our now, if I can say data type, will be able to work. So it works with a variable, but it gives us the output of now. The next element we need to work with is also very similar to what we've been working with, because we've got standard PHP values that we've got, and with any of these values we would need to have a standard keyword that links to what we call a resource. Okay, so a resource is quite tricky to explain in a single word or in single words, but a resource works this way. A resource gives us access to either a page, either an image, either a file, either any other element that we might want to add to our page. Because as we are working with PHP, we can be able to put different elements on our page. So the moment we want to use a resource as a variable, we can actually be able to then call specific elements into play. So for example, the easiest way to view what a resource does is we can actually be able to call a page or to use a page for whatever it is that we want to work with. Maybe let me actually have resource and have maybe two variations of a resource. Okay, so we then need to show what each variation does of our resource, so that we can be able to learn from our resource and see what it does. So the first one can be a get, and let me just copy that and paste that, and then the next one can also be a post. Right, so in other words, what we are then saying is we want to be able to say when the page is run, we want to be able to get a specific resource. When the page is run, we want to be able to post a specific resource. So we can simply do it this way, where for our post, for our get rather, we put our content, and we then do the following. Right, we would want to get a specific element. Okay, so for us to get our element, we need to put some code. We'll need to put some code. Okay, 1 second. Let's say here's what we've got. Because for our get function to actually be used or to be usable in a specific format, the same applies for our post. We need it to be in a form. So maybe let me just put a form, which is another type of element that we can work with within PHP. And for our forms mainly are elements that we can use whilst working with HTML. So for more information, you can maybe go through what forms do. But with our form, we usually have a method. Right? And then our method will then be equal to get. Okay, so get then becomes a method that we can actually be able to use, right? And then this also can be used as get as well, right? Which then means on one aspect, get is a method. On the other aspect, get is a resource that we can actually use to capture or to get whatever it is that we want to use within our system. Because bear in mind what we're saying with PHP, we are using scripting or scripting language to get resources from different locations. So our resource would be located within the same platform, and then that platform helps us to um, view a page or work with the page for whatever reason we want to actually work with. So, as it stands, we're just explaining some of the things that we would then get to view and get to see, and we can be able to understand this better when we're actually using these values. So, at this particular instance, it might not make sense because we're just explaining what some of these concepts do, and when we know what they do, we can then be able to implement them as we proceed or as we do whatever it is that we would want to do. So if I simply go to my page, I won't be able to notice maybe a significant change. All I'll just then get to see is just the get and the get resource. So this won't actually give us much change. Same goes for our post. I can do exactly the same thing with my post, where I can copy that section, come there and paste for my post. It won't really show me much, but let's just finish it off, and we get our post, and that then gives us something that will not give us an error, but will display our posts and our get. Would need a better example for this, but as it stands, this code can actually run and give us something that we would be able to see. So I'll also add a few resources in something that I'll give you as well, where you can then just go through what this gives us. So I think with most of some of the terms that we would want to work with, we've got what we can have as part of our introduction to variables.